Hi everyone, I'm Dana and welcome back to Inverter Always. In today's video, we're going to be talking a lot about the startup procedures for Daikin VRV systems. And there's a lot of information to talk about in today's video. So much information, in fact, that I'm going to end up breaking this into a two-part video. Leading up to today's video, over the last few weeks, we've been talking about VRV installation tips and tricks, things to look out for during the installation process, things to plan ahead and consider to make the installation go as smooth as possible. Last week we talked about pre-startup things, pressure test, evacuation, refrigerant charging procedures and calculations to make sure you have the right amount of refrigerant added to the system. All very important things that are leading us to today's video. So in today's video, we're going to be focused on the startup process, specifically powering up the equipment on a Daikin VRV system. Getting through the communication check. We want to make sure all the equipment is communicating properly. And then finally, a test operation before you can walk up to the thermostats and operate the equipment however you want. You have to run the system through a self-diagnostic. Basically, it's just a test that says, can I physically function based on how I'm currently installed? So we're going to be focusing on that today. I'm actually going to go through and show you how to do it on both the older printed circuit boards, the ones that have all the LEDs and you got to push all the buttons. And then I'm also going to show you how to do it on today's boards that we use that have a digital display and only a couple of buttons. So you're going to get to see both in today's video. So the goal is no matter what system you're working on, if it's a VRV system, you can use this video for reference. So I hope you guys enjoy. I hope you guys can learn something. Again, a lot of information to get through today, so we're going to go ahead and jump in. If you guys enjoyed today's video, please click the like button below. It really helps out my channel. And if you guys enjoy this content and haven't already, please consider subscribing. All right, you guys, let's jump in. Now, before you guys start the actual commissioning process, you want to walk the job site and make sure that everything has no power. Everything should be powered off because the power up sequence is very critical. You cannot power up the outdoor unit, for example, before you power up the indoor unit, for example. And we're going to get through these procedures in just a moment. One thing I did want to let you guys know about, though, is the outdoor unit needs to be powered for a minimum of 6 hours before you can actually operate the outdoor unit. And so typically what I'll recommend to you guys, when we're doing classes or when we're getting ready to do a startup, before I get out onto the job site to assist with that startup, I'll tell guys, hey, the night before, power up the outdoor unit so that way you can warm up the oil in the compressor. And then when we get there that next morning or the day of startup, go ahead and kill power to that outdoor unit. And then we're going to go ahead and start with powering up the indoor units, which is step 1. So in step 1, you want to power up all of your indoor equipment. You're going to then walk the job site and look at all the thermostats because you want to make sure that all the indoor units actually have power. And the way that you can do this very easily is by looking at the thermostat. If the thermostat has a display, there is power being supplied to that thermostat from the indoor unit. Now, that doesn't confirm that the system is wired properly, but it does confirm at least we have power. But when I say go check all of the thermostats for a display, I mean go physically verify that every single thermostat has a display. You can't go through 19 of 20 and then assume that because 19 of 20 had power, that 20th unit didn't have power. What ends up happening oftentimes is we're doing our startup, we power up the indoor units, we go through and power everything else up. And along the ways, we get an error code during the startup, during that outdoor unit initialization process. And it's because it saw a different number of ports on the branch box being used compared to indoor units that are actually powered and communicating with said branch box. So when I tell the contractor, okay, you need to walk through and you need to see which unit doesn't have power, it's always that unit that had the locked door or I couldn't get access to that room. And it's like, well, then we shouldn't have powered up the rest of the system until you can confirm every unit has power. That is step number 1. Every indoor unit needs to have power. Now, step number 2 is only going to apply if you have a heat recovery system. So a 3-pipe VRF system where you have branch boxes, branch selector boxes. And I'm going to add one more thing to it. This only applies if you have a branch selector box from a Generation 4, VRV4 product and later. So the newer style PCB. If you have the older VRV3, VRV2 heat recovery systems, this particular step is not going to apply to those branch boxes. This only applies to the Generation 4 and later branch boxes as of the time of this recording in 2022. You need to make sure before you power up the branch boxes, because those are next. After you power up all the indoors, you power up the branch boxes. But before you power up the branch boxes, you need to make sure that you properly set all the dip switches on each of the branch boxes for the system that you are going through and powering up. And the reason is because you need to make sure you disable the ports not being used, twin the sets of ports that are twinned, and you need to make sure you verify that the proper switches are turned on that disable ghost ports on your 6 and 10 port boxes. Now, if you are not familiar with any of these things that I'm talking about, I actually did a full-blown video just on the Daikin branch boxes, the dip switch settings, how to configure the settings, when, why, etc., etc. So go ahead and click the link in the corner of this video, and I'll show you in that video how to do everything that we're talking about in this particular step. All right, so step 3 is going to be powering up the outdoor units. At this point, we have all the indoor units powered. We verified a display on all the thermostats. Great. Went ahead, we set all the dip switches on our branch boxes, and we've powered up the branch boxes. Awesome. Now we need to power up the outdoor units. Now, if this is the first time you've ever powered up the outdoor unit, say for whatever reason you never powered it up the night before or the day before to get that 6-hour minimum on time, this is the first time you're powering up that outdoor unit, that's fine. Power it up, and then you're going to sit and wait, because the outdoor unit needs to initialize, and this initialization process can take up to about 15 minutes. It shouldn't usually take longer than this. There is a potential that it takes up to 30 minutes, which we'll talk about here in just a second. But basically, you're going to sit there and you're going to wait for the outdoor unit to go to a blank screen on VRV4 generation systems and later. These are the systems with the newer PCBs. If you have an older unit, say you have a VRV3 or a VRV2 or even a single phase VRVS or a VRV Life, or maybe you have one of those hybrid RMXS 48s. They're like a VRVS outdoor unit, but they have a different port box. It's a manifold with valves. It's like mini splits on the indoor side and VRV on the outdoor side. Anyways, it's a hybrid. It's super old. We never sell them anymore, but I digress. You might still have one in the field, or even a SkyAir system. All those other units have the older style boards where you have all the LEDs. When you power up any of those units, H2P is going to blink, H3P is going to be on and solid, and you need to sit there and you need to wait for H3P to be the only light on. That is going to tell you, as the technician, that it has successfully completed the initialization process. It's a lot to be looking out for on the older boards, whereas the newer boards, you just sit there and you wait for a blank screen. Now, if this is not the first time that you've powered up the system, remember, you should have powered it up the day before or the night before, so you get that minimum 6-hour on time to warm up the oil in the compressor. If you did that, good job for starters, you listened. Now you need to power up the outdoor unit, the condenser, because you have powered everything else already powered. This time when you power up the outdoor unit, you need to press and hold the reset button on the older style board, the board that has all the LEDs on it. You're going to press and hold that reset button for 20 seconds as soon as you apply power to the outdoor unit. So you turn the disconnect on, clunk, walk over to the unit, you verify H2P is blinking, H3P is solid, you hold the reset button for 20 seconds. The reason you hold it for 20 seconds is because depending on what literature you actually read, some of the literature says to long press. Some of the literature will actually give you an amount of time to press, but it always seems inaccurate. So what I have found over the years is if you press and hold reset for 20 seconds and then let go, it will work basically every single time. It works every time for me, at least. Now on the newer boards, VRV4 generation and newer, the one that has the digital display that just pops to you, you only have 3 buttons, you don't have a reset button. When you apply power to the outdoor unit, and you see 3 little circles flashing, that's the initialization process has started. You press and hold the return button for 20 seconds and then let go. In either case, whichever board you have, after you've pressed and held the buttons, their respective buttons, for 20 seconds and then let go, the screen doesn't change. So the VRV4 generation and later boards, the newer boards, they continue to blink the 3 small circles, eventually going solid, eventually going to a blank screen. And the older boards still have 2 blinking, 3 is solid, eventually 2 go solid with 3 solid, and eventually just 3 is the only light that's on and solid. Once you get to that blank screen on the new boards or the H3P light all by itself on the old boards, that is good. That means that the system successfully initialized. And we'll go on to the next step here in just a moment. There are a few things to look out for or things to consider when you're powering up the outdoor unit. First and foremost, you want to make sure that all your thermostats are turned off. If any of the thermostats are on, they will be in alarm. They will be in a communication alarm because they are not talking to the outdoor unit because the outdoor unit hasn't been powered yet. Well, what happens many times, especially on a brand new startup, is because the outdoor unit doesn't see any of the indoor units, it has to go through and find them and address them. There will be an error in the system and it will fail to initialize. This doesn't always happen, but it can happen. So because it can happen, you don't want it to happen. You want to reduce your risk for problems. So make sure all your thermostats are off. Now, at any point in time during this initialization process, if on a newer board you have the 3 small circles go solid and then they stay solid for more than 30 minutes, there is an error code within the system and it failed to initialize. So anytime you get any of these error codes along the way, the outdoor unit fails to initialize, the best thing to do is to go around and turn on all the thermostats, find the error codes, resolve the error codes, and then shut down the outdoor units. Anytime you shut down the outdoor units, leave them off for about 5 minutes so the capacitors can discharge and then power them back up and repeat this power up process. And hopefully next time you get through the initialization and now you're at the main screen. The main screen on the new boards is the blank screen. Blank screen is a good screen. That's the main screen. And then on the old boards, that H3P light, we call it the happy light. That's your main screen. So once you get to the main screen, you're good. We can move on to the next step. Once the system has initialized and you're at the main screen of the outdoor unit, the very next thing you need to do, which for whatever reason always gets skipped, people just immediately jump to the test, which is like 3 more steps away from where we're at. But the next thing you need to do is verify communication. You need to make sure that the outdoor unit internally addressed the same number of indoor units that you physically installed. If it didn't, and it only addressed, let's say, 4 of the 5 indoor units that you installed, then as soon as you start the test operation, you're going to have problems anyways. Again, we're trying to reduce the risk for problems. So by going through all of these steps in order, step by step, we are checking off the list things we need to do before we get to the test. So that way, by the time we get to the test, our success rate is going to be much higher. And so this next step is going to be verifying the correct number of indoor units are addressed. And if you have a heat recovery system, the correct number of ports got addressed. And I'm going to do these one at a time. We're going to start with the older PCB style, the one that's got all the lights on it, because it is a different button sequence than on the newer boards. So on your older boards, you're going to be starting with H3P, that's your main screen, and you need to go into what we call monitor mode 1, setting 5. So you press the mode button 1 time, H1P flashes, and then you press the set button 5 times. You know you've pressed it 5 times by counting the binary value. Now I know this is going to blow all of your minds, but counting the binary value actually isn't that hard. You start with the 7P light all the way on the right, that's a value of 1, and then every light to the left doubles in value. So 6 is worth 2, 5 is worth 4, 4 is worth 8, 3 is worth 16, 2 is worth 32. Now, if this is very confusing and I've lost you, it's okay. I actually did a video specifically walking you through how to learn how to read all of these buttons. So I'll put a link in the corner. You can check that video out, get a much better grasp on how to read these lights, and then come back to here and hopefully then you're caught up. Anyways, when you press the set button 5 times, you should have a binary value of 5 shown on all of these LEDs, which is H5P and H7P. 4 plus 1 equals 5. H1P will continue to flash. That is indicating that you are in the monitor mode menu, and that's fine. You can go ahead and ignore H1P for right now, but I'll continue to bring it up just to try to keep you guys on the right track. The next button you press is the return button. You press that button 1 time, and when you do, it shows you the current number of indoor units addressed. Count up that LED binary value. For example, if I have 7 indoor units installed, I should have H5P, H6P, and H7P all flashing at me, indicating that I have 4 plus 2 plus 1, which equals 7 indoor units. That means, yes, it sees all 7 that I physically installed. If I installed 7, but only lights H5P and H6P were on, that would tell me that that's 6. That means that we are missing an indoor unit, and I'll talk about how to find that missing unit here in just a brief moment. We're going to push pause on the old board. Now we're going to go to the newer style boards that have the digital readout, because in these boards, you need to go to monitor mode 1, setting number 10. So just like before, you press the mode button 1 time, but this time the screen displays 1.00. Then you're going to press the set button 10 times. It's very easy to see how many times you've pressed the set button because it shows you on screen every time you press it. 1.01, 1.02, 1.03, 1.04, and when you get to 10, the screen will say 1.10. Then you simply press the return button 1 time and it will display the number of indoor units that it has addressed. And hopefully, again, if you installed 7, you see a 7 shown on screen. Now, regardless if the number shown matches the number you installed or not, you need to escape out of that menu before proceeding to the next step. So to escape, anytime you're in any of these settings, simply press the mode button one time. Your newer boards will go back to a blank screen and your older boards will go back to H3P solid by themselves. Now, if the number of indoor units displayed does match the number you physically installed, awesome. We're going to repeat this process, but this time we're going to check for branch ports. And this is, again, only applicable on heat recovery systems, but we need to make sure that the outdoor unit sees the correct number of branch selector box ports being used to the number of ports that we're actually using in the field. Sometimes you have multiple indoor units on a single port, and so we just want to make sure if we're using 7 ports, the outdoor unit sees 7 ports being used. So from the main screen, always start from the main screen. Again, we're going to start from the old board. H3P is solid. You're going to press the mode button one time. This time you're going to go to monitor mode 1, setting 6. So with H1P flashing, telling you are in monitor mode 1, you're going to press set 6 times. This time H5P and H6P should be on because that is 4 plus 2, which is 6. Press return one time and now read the LED binary value. If I used 7 ports, again, 5, 6, and 7 should be on, showing me it sees 7 ports. Then simply press the mode button to escape. On the newer boards, the ones that have that digital readout, press mode one time, the screen flashes 1.00. Now you're going to press set 11 times, 1.11, and then press return once, and it will simply give you the number of ports that it sees. So again, if you're using 7, hopefully it flashes a 7 on screen. Again, regardless of how many ports it shows you, good or bad, matching or not matching, you need to escape then out of that setting back to the main screen by pressing the mode button one time on either of the boards that you have. That takes you back to the main screen, blank screen on the new board, H3P solid by itself on the old board. And now we can proceed to the next step. So if the number of indoor units and ports, if you have a heat recovery system, matches the number physically installed, we're going to skip the step I'm about to show you, which is something called forced fan. In the event that the number of indoor units or ports does not match the number you physically installed, and this is somewhat common, especially for those of you who don't actually go around and check that you had power to all the indoor units. When I asked you to go check that you had power to all the indoor units, skipped one. Oops, that was the one we couldn't get access to, Dana. Sorry about that. Well, I told you, we're going to now have to do more work. So we have to enable a setting from the outdoor unit called forced fan. And what forced fan does is it tells all the indoor units that it can see to operate their fans. And the idea here is when you enable this mode, you just have to walk around the building, look at all the indoor units and see which one is not operating its fan. And that one is the culprit. Oh man, shoot. Now we don't know what's wrong with it. Maybe it's wiring related, maybe it's power related. I actually did a whole video on forced fan. So I'll put a link in the corner of the screen for that video. You can check it out, get a little bit more information. Today, I'm just going to show you how to get into it so that we can find that problem child and then move on to the next step. So when you need to turn on or enable forced fan, again, you're going to start from the main screen. On the older boards, H3P is solid. This time we need to change a setting. So we're going to press and hold the mode button until H1P is solid. And then we're going to go to, it's called service mode 2, setting number 5. So H1P is solid. That tells us we're in service mode 2. Hit set 5 times. You know you've pressed it 5 times because H5P and H7P are on. That's 4 plus 1, which equals 5. Then press return. When you press return, it's going to show you the current option. Current option is off or disabled, which is H7P. So H7P will be sitting there flashing. Ignore H1P, it's still solid. That's just telling you what menu you're in. You're in the service mode menu, that's fine. H7P is flashing. We need to enable force fan. So we press set 1 time to move it from option 1 to option 2. H6P has a value, binary value of 2. So now H6P will be blinking. You save this setting by pressing return 1 time. It goes from a flashing 6 to a solid on 6. That tells you you've saved that setting. And now you need to activate that setting. So you press return 1 more time and it goes back to H1P solid by itself. Now leave the board there because now you need to walk through the building, look at all the indoor units and see which indoor unit is not blowing the fan. Or not blowing air, not running the fan motor, and that is the culprit. Once you've identified which unit is the problem child, go back to the outdoor unit. On the older board styles, you can simply just kill power. then go fix the problem, then go back to the outdoor unit, reboot it, hold reset for 20 seconds, because now you are going to be adding an indoor unit or multiple indoor units onto the communication network. So you need to tell the outdoor unit to readdress during the initialization process. On newer boards, so VRV4 generation and later, again, start from the blank screen, and the button sequence is actually the same. Press and hold the mode button until 2.00 is flashing. 2.00 is service mode 2, and then you're going to press set 5 times, so you should have 2.05. Then press return 1 time. It's going to flash a 0 on the screen. 0 on these newer boards means off. You're going to hit set 1 time, so it flashes a 1. That means on. I want to turn on forced fan operation, then hit return once. It goes from a flashing 1 to a solid 1. I've saved that setting and then hit return 1 more time. That activates the setting. It goes back to 2.00. Now leave it here, walk the job, look for the problem child indoor unit or indoor units. Great, we found them. Go back to the outdoor unit, turn it off. Fix the problem, come back to the outdoor unit, turn it on, press and hold return for 20 seconds to tell this outdoor unit or this type of board to readdress the indoor units, because we are now adding to the number of indoor units on the communication circuit. It's very important. Anytime you're adding or removing indoor units from the communication network, you have to power cycle the outdoor unit, and when you power it back on, hold that return or the reset button, depending on what board you have, for 20 seconds to tell it to readdress all of the equipment. So we've gone through and initialized, we've fixed any of the problems from the last step that we have. Now we're at a blank screen. We've verified communication. We see all the indoor units. We see all the ports if it's a heat recovery system. Awesome. Great. Now what? Well, a lot of folks will just straight jump to the test mode, but we're actually skipping one more very important step. And we have to actually go backwards to last week's video where we talked about doing the pressure test, triple evacuation, and refrigerant charging calculations. We have to make sure that we've added all of the necessary field added refrigerant charge before we can run the test. You can't run the test if you haven't added in all of the necessary refrigerant. So sometimes the vacuum will not pull in all the refrigerant charge that you need to add, and that's okay. There is a process that we have to add the remaining charge, and I'm going to walk you through how to do that now. On the older PCBs, the one with all the lights, again, we're going to start with H3P solid. This time we're going to go to service mode 2, setting 20. So just like before, you're going to press and hold the mode button until H1P is solid, and then you're going to press set 20 times. So this time you're looking for binary value 16 and binary value 4. Binary value 4 is H5P, and then you're going to also be looking for H3P, which is a value of 16. So you should have 1, 3, and 5 on. That is indicating that you've pressed set the proper number of times, which is 20. Then press return. You go into that setting, 7 flashes to tell you that setting is currently off. Press set 1 time to go from 7 flashing to 6 flashing. That turns it on. Then hit return once, and it will go to a solid 6, no longer flashing. Solid 6 means you've saved that setting, but you still need to activate that setting. So press return 1 more time, and now all the lights will start lighting up and flashing. And on the older boards, this is how you know that you've enabled the additional refrigerant charge mode. Now at this point, you need to make sure that the bottle of R410A is on the scale. The scale is zeroed out. The hoses are purged, and you've connected your hoses to the refrigerant charging port on VRVS, VRV Life, SkyAir, the hybrid super multi RMXS systems, VRV2, VRV3, all those systems came with a charge port. And usually that charge port is right next to your main service port. So that's where you want to hook up the hose. As the system turns on and starts operating to pull in that liquid refrigerant, remember with R410A, you always need to add it as a liquid, and you're weighing it in based on that calculated amount that you should be adding to the system based on your installation capacity and field piping lengths. I digress. You need to make sure that it's hooked up to the charge port, because that charge port is going to pull it through a capillary tube. It's going to flash it off. It's going to be adding the refrigerant safely. This charge port also exists on the VRV4 systems. However, when we went to VRVX and now VRV Emerion, and later, whatever we get down the road, we no longer have that charge port to use. And so there's a little bit of a different process for adding the refrigerant. I'm going to walk you through that now. On the newer board styles, you're going to again start from the main screen, which is a blank screen. You're going to press and hold the mode button until the screen flashes 2.00. Again, you want to go into service mode 2. And now we're going to go to setting 20. So you press set 20 times, the screen will simply display 2.20. It's much easier to follow how many times you've pressed the set button on the newer boards. Once you get to 2.20, you're going to hit the return button. It's going to flash a 0, which is indicating that that setting is off. It's not enabled, it's disabled. Press set 1 time to enable it. And that goes from a 0 to a flashing 1. Then you're going to press return 1 time to save it. It goes from a flashing 1 to a solid 1, and then press return 1 more time. And now you're going to get a T01. That activates the setting. So as soon as you see T01, that system's going to then come on. In a few minutes, the compressor will start and it will operate and it will start to pull in that refrigerant. Now, VRV4 systems, as mentioned, we have that charge port, but on VRVX and later, we no longer have the charge port. So where in the heck do we put our hose? You're actually going to put the hose connected to the suction service port, but you need to be extremely careful here because as you're weighing in the refrigerant directly into the suction line, you don't want to flood the compressor. You don't want to wash out the bearings. You don't want to wash that oil out from the compressor. So you need to make sure that you are metering the amount of refrigerant you're adding as the system's running and pulling it in. We typically just call this bleeding the refrigerant into the system. There is a specific rate you need to stay under, and that rate is stay under 2 pounds per minute. So as you're adding the refrigerant, you're watching the scale, you need to make sure that you are not adding more than 2 pounds per minute, if that makes sense. It's actually slightly more than that. It's 2.2 pounds. But as I'm always telling you guys to just, err on the side of caution, stay under 2 pounds per minute. So you're just cracking that hose, you're just bleeding it in. Additional charge mode, whether you're on VRV3 or VRV4, whichever board you have, will run for 30 minutes and then automatically shut off. And if it automatically shuts off, that's fine. If you still need to add more refrigerant, just repeat all of these steps to go back into additional refrigerant charge mode. If you needed to add additional refrigerant, you need to make sure to follow those processes to get all of the refrigerant added that needs to be added before we run the test. Now, once you're done adding all the refrigerant that you need to add on the older board style, you simply press the mode button 1 time. It goes back to H3P solid main screen. On the newer board style, you actually have to press the return button when you're done for it to escape out of the charge mode, shut down, and then go back to a blank screen. So now we're finally ready to do the test. Test operation is required on every VRV system, every SkyAir system, every Super Multi RMXS hybrid system, VRVS, VRV Life, basically anything we've been talking about that has one of the 2 boards that you've seen in this video. All of those systems require a test run to be completed before you can just arbitrarily walk up to a thermostat and run the system. It's extremely important before starting this test that you do one more walkthrough through the building, make sure all the thermostats are off. Tell everyone that you are doing testing on the HVAC. Please don't touch the thermostats. Lots of folks like to touch the thermostats as soon as they see a display. They think, oh, hey, I have a display on my thermostat. I'm going to turn it on. I'm going to get cooling going, or I'm going to get heating going. And so make sure you let everyone know, hey, we're doing testing. Please don't touch the stats. Make sure they're all in the off mode. So whatever thermostat you have on site, make sure it's off. You do not want any stats on, because if any stats are on, they are going to be an alarm. And if the system has an error, as soon as you start the test, it's going to immediately fail the test. And again, we are trying to make this go as smooth as possible. So check that the stats are off before we start the test. When you're ready to start the test on the older PCB style with all the lights, verify that you're at the main screen. H3P is the only light on. Now simply hold the test button until 2 and 7 light up. 2 and 7 will light up. One of them will be blinking, one of them will be solid, and I can never remember which one is which for whatever silly reason, but 2 and 7 light up. Once you see that, let go. The test has begun. On your newer board style, start with the main screen. That's the blank screen. And again, you're going to start the test by pressing and holding the set button. The newer boards do not have a test button, so we're going to hold the set button from a blank screen until we see T01 displayed. That is telling us that now the test has started. Let go of that button. At this point, now the test is going to go through and it's going to check communication. It's going to check for restrictions. Did you open up your outdoor unit isolation valves? So the service ports, did you open up isolation valves on the branch boxes? If you have any of those installed anywhere in the system, am I going to see temperature exchange across all the indoor units? That's really what the outdoor unit is looking for. In my experience, Most of the time when it fails because there's a restriction, because it doesn't see flow through one of the indoor units. I was just on a job site earlier this week doing a startup where the unit failed on an E4 low pressure, and it was because the isolation valves were closed, and so the indoor units were getting no refrigerant flow, so the system was basically just pumping it down. And you can see this if you happen to have a service checker hooked up before you start the test. But if you don't, then you're just sitting there waiting. So make sure you double check all your isolation valves. Fun fact, if you do find a closed isolation valve, it is extremely important to check both the liquid and the gas side. So if it's like on a branch box set of ports, if both of those are closed, then it is possible when you did your system's pressure test and evacuation procedures, those valves were closed and nothing on that line set got included. So what you need to do at that point, rather than just, oh, I found a closed valve and going and opening that valve, what you actually need to do is pull that line set into a vacuum to make sure there's no moisture or non-condensables, and then go ahead and open up those isolation valves. But sometimes you only see that the liquid or the gas is closed. In that case, you're pulling from the rest of the system. It's gonna pull through, so you can go ahead and just open up that valve. But anytime there's both valves closed on a circuit, you need to make sure that you don't accidentally introduce moisture or non-condensables. So now your test has started. The test itself can take up to 1 hour. Usually it doesn't take the full 1 hour, but this is a really good time for you to clean up anything, do paperwork. During the test, your thermostats will turn on. They will be completely locked out. They will be in test mode. So there really isn't anything you can do at the thermostat level. So all your field settings, all of your addressing, which we're going to talk about in part 2 of this video, the next video, next weekend, is addressing and programming of the thermostats. Right now, we're just sitting here waiting and hoping that the test operation completes successfully. You'll know that the test has completed successfully because A, the thermostats turn back off. They go back to the regular main screen. Also, your outdoor unit shuts down. Also, if it's the old PCB, it goes back to H3P solid by itself. If it's the newer PCB, it goes back to a blank screen. Along the way, the LED sequence on the old board is going to change as it goes through all the different steps through test operation. And this is normal. Don't freak out or anything. And on the newer board style, T01 will cycle all the way through T10. If it fails for any reason, you will get an error code on the newer style boards because they have the ability to display error codes. And on the older style boards, the ones with all the lights, you're simply going to get H2P solid and H3P solid. And that means you have an error. So if you have an error, you need to go to the thermostats, see what the error code is. That will then tell you what the test failed on. And at that point, open up the service manual or go to the Daikin Tech Hub app, plug in the error code, figure out what was the problem, resolve the error code, reboot the system, restart the test. Once you pass the test, for starters, congratulations. I mean, this is like the hardest part, is getting through all of these very long, tedious tasks, these steps. If you've passed the test at this point now, you can turn on the stats, run the system in heat, run the system in cooling. You do need to go through and program your addresses, do all of your field settings. You still need to hook up your D checker or your service checker, depending on which VRV system you're working on. You need to do performance testing. The test operation itself is not a performance test. It is simply a, can I physically operate under these conditions type of test. It is checking to make sure you don't have closed service ports and things like that. It is not a performance test. So the next thing we need to do, the thing we're going to do in the next video, is we're going to go through and we're going to start addressing and programming all the field settings to all the indoor units. And in that video, I'm going to show you how to do it on a nav controller, a Daikin 1 smart thermostat, and a Daikin Madoka, because those are the 3 main styles of controllers used, at least today, as of the recording of this video. And especially in my market, in the North American market. Of course, there might be other thermostats available around the world. We're not going to be talking about those, but these are the more common ones. The nav controller is the most common controller used on VRV systems. The Madoka is still pretty new, and the Daikin 1 is still pretty new. So I'm going to show you how to do it on all 3, just to, again, try to give you guys that visual aid. But yeah, for today's video, that is it, you guys. I hope you were able to stick around. It was a little bit of a lengthy video, but tons of information to get through. If you guys have any questions, please feel free to put them in the comments below. I read all of your guys' questions. I do my best to answer all of your guys' questions. Of course, I'm going to put members first. If you guys Really appreciate this. If any of my videos help you guys out and you want to become members, it's very easy. Simply click the join button. It's on the main channel page right next to that subscribe button, which, speaking of, if you guys haven't already and you enjoy this content, please consider subscribing. Thank you so much for watching Inverter always, you guys. I hope you all have an awesome day.